Welcome back to the Christian Century YouTube channel. I'm John. I'm joined today by one of our columnists, Phil Christman, who has written an essay for us recently called Reviled for Jesus' Sake. We're going to be diving into some of the themes of that essay, but before we do, Phil, hello. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hey John, thank you. What's up, Christian Century readers? Yeah, as John said, I'm one of the columnists for Christian Century. I'm a writer. I live in Ann Arbor. I teach freshman English at the University of Michigan. And my next book, which comes out in September from Erdman's, is it's called Why Christians Should Be Leftists.
Okay. Well, the title sort of says it all there, I think.
Hmm.
Looking forward to that one. Okay, so in the beginning of this essay, you're talking about the decline of the main line, which is talked about a lot, and there are narratives that help try to explain why the main line has been declining. And then you say, evangelicalism has been on the decline now too, and there are also narratives used to describe why that is happening. But you don't really like these interpretations, and so I wondered if you could tell us a little more about why you don't love the reasons often given for these declines.
For most of my life that I can remember hearing people talk about either of these issues, I mean, like when I first encountered the narrative of mainline decline, it was as a kid who was a fundamentalist attending a GARB church. And it was a straightforwardly like back patting triumphalist story about well, yeah, the main line is dying because those churches are dead. They don't really believe in God over there. They're just going to church to be respectable, which like I was a kid in the 80s, and I think going to church to be respectable, I think that had been dying for quite a while at that point. So I don't know how convincing that argument is, but that was the first version of that story that I ever encountered. And at the time I was a kid and I was like, oh, okay, sure. I believed a lot of things because kids believe things that their parents tell them. But and then as I got older, I mean, first I started checking out mainline churches for myself because I remained Christian, but came to doubt things like biblical inerrancy, for example, that were sort of hmm, like constitutive doctrines of the churches I'd grown up in. And then like I don't know, you have a woman minister who wouldn't be allowed to preach at any church you grew up in, and she saved your life and like makes your faith more possible. And this happened to me like with a couple of times with a couple of people, where a minister who's LGBTQ, um, but is just a deeply faithful person, and you can see it in the way they live, which I mean, I think biblically that's like one of the ultimate epistemological tests is like you will know people by their fruits. Um, like, yeah, you really start to doubt that story because you're like, okay, well, I see what you mean about numerical decline, but I'm attending a church that is more alive, that there's like 25 people in it, but it's more alive than like churches I've been in where there's like 1,000 people singing like the worst song I've ever heard really, really passionately, and it's like you're in an episode of The Righteous Gemstones. And there, it's lively, but it's not alive. Um, so I doubt I that
Yeah.
that all seems really questionable. Um, and now, although this is hard to, I've seen different figures about this, and I'm not a statistician, but it sounds like maybe fundamentalist growth has started to sort of taper off too. So like, well, if there was this easy moralistic story we could tell about like the PCUSA 40, 30 years ago, or are we going to tell the same story now? And a part of me almost kind of wants to, like, neener, neener, haha, fundamentalists,
Yeah.
um, but well, when you feel the urge to stunt on people who've stunted on you, you should probably resist it. And so, I try to do that as well in the piece. Um, yeah, did you have other questions about that part?
No, I rarely say anything from my own brain in these videos, but I had some thoughts because I love this part of the essay so much, and I grew up evangelical as well. The narratives we heard about the main line were wild. I mean, it was just like consistently, well, they've watered down the gospel so much that no one wants it. What people want is the pure, undefiled word of God, and we give them that. That's why they're coming to us and we're growing. But then once we stop growing, or just even consider the question like, okay, well, why is Islam the fastest growing religion then? If
Mm.
growth means that you're doing God's will, does that just mean that Islam's a little bit better than Christianity? And they'd be like, oh, no, 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 no. But Satan's the prince of this world and he's fooled all these people and so it's very inconsistent logic across the board.
Yeah, I mean, does God think that Titanic is the greatest movie ever made? Because, or, oh no, I'm sorry. Now it would be Avatar. I mean, those are fine movies, but like, come on, like that's just a brain dead way to assess the goodness and rightness of things. And the thing is, though, I mean, I think part of the reason these narratives stick around, I mean, if you a person who reads the column will see that like okay, I question these narratives, but I also plainly have had them in my head to question for a long time. And I mean, I've been in mainline churches that yeah, they had watered everything down to the point where there was hardly anything left. I went to I remember going to a Presbyterian church one time, and they had basically done to the Nicene Creed what Thomas Jefferson did to the New Testament. Just anything miraculous had been taken out, and I was like, yeah, you know what? Sometimes that fundamentalist story about the main line is just 100% correct. And then what's really fascinating about that, in addition to like your excellent point about like, oh, well, then why is Islam kicking your guys's, anyway. Um, in addition to that, like, what when I read these news stories about, yeah, I went to a mega church, I went to an evangelical mega church, and there were like two words about Jesus, and like the sermon was about Trump, then I see there like a kind of type of like what the fundamentalists correctly in some cases accuse mainliners of doing, just completely like lopping off the Christian parts of Christianity in order to fit into the culture. It's just like an even stupider and worse version of the culture than the one that the mainliners are editing themselves to be part of. Instead of 1920s progressivism, it's 2020 something fascism.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. In the essay, you start to grapple with, well, can we get a sense of what God thinks or feels, or approval from God on the stuff that's happening? And you say, well, maybe Karl Barth can be helpful. This idea from Barth that God's yes can be contained in God's no. And you said that maybe for certain mainline Christians today, God's yes could be contained in MAGA's no. And I wondered if you could just tell us a little more about this concept from Barth and how, you're finding it helpful in making sense of things.
Yeah, I mean, so what Bart does is he sort of totalizes, but in opposite directions at the same time. And so, because if you think about American Christianity too long, as an American Christian, who has been like, for both you and me, sounds like we both grew up in evangelical spaces, and then for further spiritual nourishment, we turned to mainline spaces. And like you can tell a story about every branch of American Christianity that is completely dystopian, and in which those traditions have been completely subverted. And like if you pick your examples right, I mean, you won't be wrong. I mean, the evidence is there. Like, we've failed. Um, And so then you're just like, what? I don't know if other people do this, but I've definitely thought myself into a cul-de-sac before about like, well, maybe I whatever. I just have grown up in a version of Christianity that is just so far away from anything Jesus intended that I'm like I'm on the wrong side of a Lessing's ugly historical ditch or whatever that phrase is, the between then and now, and I can't get back to anything that is truly Christian. And like, boy, that'll just drive you crazy. If you find yourself thinking that those kinds of things, it's probably a depression symptom. Um, I mean, if God was alive 2000 years ago, then God is alive now. Um, and so yeah, what Bart does, and it's not that's not the only place in his theology where he does it, is like he has that same instinct to just make these totalizing, you know, fine, kind of declarations, but he always does them kind of dialectically, like a total yes and a total no at the same time. And he sees that as being characteristic of how God acts within history. That just kind of leads me to ask myself, well, can I see places where God is pretty unmistakably, saying yes to anything that contemporary American Christians are doing. And well, Jesus says that if you're doing your job right, living right, you won't necessarily always be persecuted 100% of the time, but you will get some persecution. Um, and I've there's just been this repeated pattern since Trump took office for the second time of people being like lied about, libeled, like exposed to, ugly public attack of the kind that like if the president is like attacking you on Twitter or JD Vance is attacking you on Twitter, like they know that that means you're getting death threats from people that aren't them. Like that's like part of why they are doing it, you know. Um, and this has repeatedly happened to people who are like doing really what 8 months ago would have, I think, been legible as like really banal forms of just Christian decency. Um, and a lot of this has to do with helping immigrants and refugees, which when I did the research for my first book, one of Midwest Futures, which is a kind of like pop cultural history of the Midwest, basically. Um, the One of the really, I don't know, kind of moving things for me that I discovered in researching for that book is like, why is there so much like refugee resettlement in the Midwest? Well, it's because like these totally, conventional like Lutherans of the type that Garrison Keillor made a whole career making, gentle jokes about. People like that, uh, after like in the early part of the 20th century, created a basically like a big like infrastructure for getting like people who were starving as a result of World War I out of Germany. And then once they had that infrastructure lying around, they didn't just keep using it for other ethnic Germans. They were like, well, golly gee, who else could we use this for? There's a lot of suffering out there. Got to do something about it. And they just did. And that's why you have huge Hmong and Somali populations, for example, in Minneapolis. That's a beautiful thing, man. Um, and we took it, and it used to be a beautifully banal thing, and we took it for granted for too long, and now it's imperiled. And like if there's anything I would be honored to die for, not to make myself sound brave, I lead a very like boring and reclusive life, but if there's anything I would be honored to die for, it's preserving this country is the kind of place that takes in people because they have nothing, who have nothing, but the shirts on their back, and like furnish to use John Edwards's phrase, furnishes them liberally. Not doesn't just give them bare subsistence, but like really helps people like live comfortable lives. Um, that's a beautiful thing, and we just let it go because people had a dumb nostalgia for the not that good economy of 2018 and 2019. It's just staggering to me.
Yes, to me as well. You mentioned just now persecution and in the essay, and I agree with what you wrote in the essay. This is just textbook religious persecution. I mean, Christians are helping refugees and immigrants, and then the administration lies about them, attacks them. But as I read it, I was thinking, yeah, but it's hard to feel like that obvious claim could be taken seriously after decades of evangelicals crying wolf about being persecuted in the US. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about persecution, real and fake, both being talked about now.
I guess I just think we should expect the continuing history of Christianity and of you know of God's activity on earth, and then of people's really stupid attempts to live up to or live in light of God's activity on earth, and I include myself in that. Um, we should expect that to have all sorts of like absurd ironies in it. And I mean, I kind of think that's one of the big ones, right? I mean, I was a fundamentalist. I was expecting even well into adulthood when I kind of knew better, I was expecting like for example, I don't really keep my I don't keep the fact that I'm a Christian. I don't really keep that silent when I'm talking to people, at work. Like I try not to, um, be annoying about it, but I don't edit that out of my self-description of how I live when it comes up. And I try to make it clear that like no, I'm not. I don't mean like I love the ritual of church and it just makes me feel, a nice buzz inside. I try to mean no. I believe all the crazy stuff. I am not a good citizen of enlightened modernity. I think a guy might have come out of the grave one time. Um, and I try to make all that clear, and um, people are not mean to me about it, and when they are, they're usually people I don't respect anyway. It's you're a Richard Dawkins fan. Oh, well, I'm really losing out by not being able to have conversations with you. I expected like it's like that John Mulaney joke about quicksand. I expected to encounter quicksand a lot more as an adult because of pop culture. Well, I expected to encounter a lot more religious persecution as an adult uh, from having grown up fundamentalist. And like, yeah, it's just a textbook sick irony that in in fact, from prematurely fearing persecution, uh, you know, Christians have helped vote us into a situation where, it may be illegal to do basic Christian deeds like uh, clothe the naked and befriend the stranger. That's just darkly funny to me, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for chatting, Phil. This has been fun. And anyone out there who missed the essay, the link will be in the video description below. You can read this essay. Also, you can visit Phil's Substack and read more of his writing. But yeah, thanks for taking the time to chat today.
Yeah, thank you, John.